All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will continue recounting Bruce Lee's final months. Lots of gems, lots of doctor's appointments, lots of, hey man, I'm as fit as an 18-year-old. I'm just gonna die in a few weeks. Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out!
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
Sifu, it's been a minute. What's going on?
It has been a minute.
It feels like it's been a minute.
For our audience,
right.
We are here every week.
Yeah.
But we basically do like these marathon recordings of episodes.
Oh, yeah.
And then we'll take a couple of weeks off. I had my ITC, had a number of other events going on, some travel. So it's actually been a while since we've been here.
That boot cake.
So anyway, we're doing part 2 to an episode that we did, came out a couple of weeks ago that people really seem to have been responding to, which is Bruce Lee's final year. What I mean by final year, I mean the 1973. So I'm not talking about the final 12 months of his life. I'm basically talking about the final 7 months because he died in July of 73.
Right.
As I discussed on the first episode, his January 73 to July 73, when he had his untimely passing, was a very tumultuous time period in Bruce Lee's life. It was the time that he shot Enter the Dragon, edited Enter the Dragon, got everything ready to go. This was going to be his big vehicle to launch him as a big star in the U.S., which was his whole goal. And then he ends up, unfortunately, dying before he can really see the success of it. And it really is unfortunate because, as I mentioned in the first episode, Bruce Lee's goal, at least according to his notes and conversations he had with other people. And, there's obviously some secondhand and third-hand stuff here. So, we can never say 100% certain what was. But Bruce's goal in Hong Kong was to go there, make a number of films, become successful, and then use that to come back to the States as a big star. Because for years in Hollywood after Green Hornet, he really struggled to get roles. He got some bit parts like in Marlowe, some TV stuff. He got some work as a choreographer. Like
I love
the
his sneakers in Marlowe, by the way. It's just amazing.
He got some, some choreography work and stuff, but they weren't putting him in anything as the big star because at that time, and perhaps even to today, Hollywood was very reluctant to put an Asian as a leading man as the main star in anything. So his idea, based on on James Coburn's advice, was to go to Hong Kong, do a bunch of films there, become a big star, and then use that
Clint
as
Eastwood
his card.
style.
Yeah, like with the spaghetti westerns, right? And so that's why I think for a lot of Bruce Lee fans, including myself, we tend to lose that perspective. Like we think, oh, he became the big Hong Kong movie star, and then he made Enter the Dragon, and that was it. But that was part of his plan to come back to Hollywood. He had, at least according to what we know from his notes and conversations he had with other people, that his plan was to go back to Los Angeles. Yeah. Perhaps have something similar to what Jackie Chan did when in the time when he was making Rush Hour, come to LA and make a few movies there, maybe make a few movies in Asia. But I think that eventually Bruce wanted to stay in the States and become a big American star. I don't think he just wanted to be the king of Hong Kong cinema.
Got it.
Because it's a very small pool there comparatively. He wanted to be an international film star, and he wanted to be a film star in the U.S., where he was not able to be one because of racism, because of lack of opportunity. So it's important to keep that perspective that all of this hard work, all of this stuff, it seemed that he's building to a return to the U.S., but it's because he died in Hong Kong at the height of his fame in Hong Kong that we sometimes tend to see him as a kind of a Hong Kong actor, but he was someone who kind of got big in Hollywood after he passed away.
Now, quick question. Enter the Dragon came out exactly when related to his death?
So Bruce died in July of 73, and Enter the Dragon, I believe, came out in August. Yeah. Came out the next month.
Yeah, that is
so he would, his big thing, because Steve McQueen was one of his students. And Steve McQueen was like, the George Clooney of that time. He was like the top guy, tough guy, action, maybe the George Clooney thing is maybe not the perfect scenario, but I'm just talking in terms of like level of stardom, you know, like big star. And Steve McQueen had learned some Jeet Kune Do from Bruce Lee, but Steve McQueen was also, he was a typical Hollywood star. And he had done something to Bruce that kind of pissed Bruce Lee off. And he had signed something to Bruce, to my number one fan, Steve McQueen. Right? Like to Bruce, my number one fan, Steve McQueen.
Oh.
And for Bruce, who was his teacher, this was very insulting. Because it meant that respect that a student is supposed to have for their teacher wasn't there. It would be like if I wrote on a headshot of myself and sent it to Sifa Leung Ting, you know, like, you know, to Sifa Leung Ting, you know, my biggest fan, you know, Alex Richter, right? It would be massively insulting, be like, right? No. Sorry. So Steve McQueen, I don't know if I misspoke. He said, you know, to my biggest fan, meaning Bruce Lee is his biggest fan, right? Ouch. And that was very insulting. And then he also, I believe, wanted Steve McQueen to be in his project, The Silent Flute, which was something that he had written. He had kind of tried to get this thing produced in Hollywood, and it just wasn't happening. And then Steve McQueen, who was a student and he considered a friend, he asked Steve to do it, and Steve refused. And I think Bruce felt very insulted. What was his reasoning? Well, I don't know what his reasoning was, but Bruce had not yet established himself as a big Hollywood movie star at that point. And then he's asking his friend, who happens to be the biggest movie star, can you do my movie? Right. And I think because Bruce's stardom in Hollywood wasn't tested, I think that was a test of their friendship that Steve McQueen wasn't willing to do yet, to put his name on a project which might end up failing. Right? So then as a second choice, he went to James Coburn. And then the project ended up not being made.
One of his other students.
Yes. Who was also a big star, but not quite Steve McQueen level. And they had gone to India to, look for some locations to shoot. And it ended up just not being a thing. Now, in hindsight, that was probably a good thing, because when you read the notes that we have on The Silent Flute and the story, it was like way trippy and way out there. It was way of its time. Very almost, if you say, like a very kind of hippie-ish martial arts philosophical take on things. And I think that it would have been too heavy-handed on the philosophical
for the Hollywood
stuff.
Thing.
Yeah, I just think it would have kind of sucked, actually. I mean, look, I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan, but I also think that had he finished Game of Death, I think Game of Death would have been an incoherent mess. Because despite what people say, he did not have a full script for Game of Death. He had an outline. He had what's called a treatment. Think about it. At the time of his death, they suddenly got George Lazenby, who was a one-time James Bond guy who kind of nuked his career by refusing to play James Bond again. When they did all the promotion for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, George Lazenby refused to do things the way the movie company wanted him to do. He grew a beard out, went on the talk shows with a beard, didn't look at all like James Bond, and kind of refused to do it again. And, you know, James Bond is a franchise. And then basically got the ability to play James Bond, which was a huge opportunity for someone who had no real acting cred and was basically an Australian model. And then did this movie, which was, depending on who you ask, fairly well received.
That's like me opening a McDonald's and changing the whole arc M and everything, just jacking it up.
No, it's a little bit like you getting on an actual good podcast with 1 million viewers and be like, why'd they take this guy? Wasn't he just like from that Kung Fu Genius podcast that like 6 people watch, right?
That's what it's like.
And then you're like, and then you get this offer to be on a huge podcast. Oh, no. You do it, it's really successful, and then you don't want to do it again. That's what it was. It was like the guy got an opportunity he shouldn't have had and decided that, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. And think about it, at the time of Bruce Lee's death, they were figuring out how to shoehorn George Lazenby into Game of Death. They were still trying to figure it out. So Bruce Lee kind of filmed these fight scenes in the banana suit and then had to make the rest of the movie around it. So when Bruce Lee died, and then later in the late 70s, Raymond Chow decided to finish Game of Death. But he finished Game of Death using doubles and repurposed footage, and he rewrote the original idea. That wasn't too different from what they would have had to do with Game of Death anyway, even if Bruce Lee was alive. It's kind of like, we have 3 fight scenes. and we have the culmination of a movie for which we don't really have a story for. A loose story. He's a former martial arts champion. His sister gets kidnapped. He has to go to Korea, and it culminates in those fights. That was the extent of it. And they're still trying to figure out how to shoehorn George Lazenby because, they want to get him while he's hot. And so I think Game of Death, had they finished it, would have been kind of a mess. All right. I'm like, I think it would have been all over the place. And when you see the stuff that they cut out, when you see the uncut footage where he like drones on about Jeet Kune Do philosophy, the bamboo is flexible and you must be flexible to adapt. And it's like very, like he has all this exposition where he's like explaining the philosophy by saying it. Right. And then I just think it would have been an awful mess. But anyway, let's get to part 2 of why people are really here, which is to discuss Bruce Lee's final 1973, the final months of his life.
Hey everyone, it's the Kung Fu Genius. Fans and practitioners all know that the wooden dummy is the most coveted tool in Wing Chun, and now you can learn all about it in my cleverly titled book, The Wooden Dummy. I wrote this guide with you, the practitioner, in mind. Rather than mystifying any of the concepts or hiding so-called secrets, I've laid it all out in meticulous detail. The book is contextualized for practitioners of any lineage of the art, not just those who come from WT. Over 300 pages in length, The Wooden Dummy breaks down every aspect from the form, about technical, historical, theoretical details, and it makes it the perfect companion for anyone who's learning the wooden dummy techniques. I've even sweetened the deal for you. If you want to get a copy of this book signed by me, just use the coupon code SIGNATURE when you purchase the unsigned copy, and you will get the signed copy at no additional cost. So go to the link below or go to citywingchun.com/shop. Look up the Wooden Dummy book. Don't miss your chance. This is definitely one of the best books I've ever written on the wooden dummy, and I hope you'll find it's the best book ever written on the wooden dummy. Get yours today. Check it out.
So for people who missed part 1, please go back and watch part 1, because part 1 starts from January, and we went all the way, and we left off at April 30th.
Nice.
Okay. So spoiler alert, he dies July 20th. So we are going to start today with Saturday, May 5th. Okay. I'm going to jump around a little bit for people who missed the first one. I explained all this. I got this timeline from a really great blog called Pop Cult Master, where he has the kind of final months of Bruce Lee. And this is all from various sources, some stuff from newspapers, some stuff from Bleecker, some stuff from here, some stuff from there. But it's put on a timeline with dates. What I did is I put those notes there. I vetted everything too. I wanted to make sure that the stuff was accurate.
Oh, right.
But then what I've since inserted were the drug letters. Okay, because the drug letters was a new revelation, and the drug letters have dates on them. And so I could go like in between here, you can put it so you can actually see. Wow. And if you saw part 1, you saw how the drug letters corresponded with some of the things that were going on in his life. Another thing too is I can vouch for this being relatively accurate. However, there may be dates, there may be exact things that, that are not quite right or maybe a little bit off, and I'm more than welcome. If people know better, let me know so I can make amendments to my notes here or whatever. I wasn't even a piece of protein in my dad's hamburger in 1973. Oh, right. So none of this is firsthand stuff. This is from other sources, right? So if you have some better information and so on and so forth, I would love that. In the first one, we talked about the press conference for Fist of the Unicorn, talked about how Chen Wai Man was there and the photos. And someone told me that actually the Chen Wai Man stuff was in the previous year. That was for the press conference, perhaps announcing Fist of the Unicorn, but it wasn't necessarily, those photos that we used in the last episode weren't necessarily from the press conference after it was released. So things like that, like I'm more than happy to be corrected on those things. No one has all the best stuff. I've done my best to kind of make sure that the information is accurate, but I may misspeak. I may make a mistake. I may occasionally mix some things because these are, things that we are speaking secondhand on. And again, the notes here basically have a date and a timeline when different things happened. The Pop Cult Master, where I took this information from, he also occasionally inserts his own opinion on this stuff. And like all things in history, and I hate to be repetitive, but some people may be watching this episode first. I said this in the first part. we have facts and we have dates,
Mm-hmm.
and those things could be corroborated. We could say, okay, this did in fact happen on those dates. But what history is always in the interpretation of those data. So that means that I can have some of the data, but I'm going to try to do my best to say what happened. And then when I say what my take is on it, make it very clear that this is my take on it, or this is what the guy says in here. So you can take the facts and the dates, but the interpretation of the data, which is the hard history, which is where we have to extrapolate information when we don't quite know, that is the stuff that is always up for debate. And that I freely admit, that's the way it is, right? So anyway, Saturday, May 5th, 1973.
Cinco de Mayo.
Okay, so the insurance policies had come into place, which we talked about before, the various insurance policies on Bruce Lee's life. This is creepily reminiscent of the Chinese Stuntmen, a 1981 drama featuring Dan Inosanto. By the way, that is the blog writers' interpolation there. All right, Mike, is it creepily reminiscent of something, right? It was planned because he didn't dance to the tune of the Triads. This I don't necessarily agree with. There's always this kind of triad shit. I don't know, maybe this is stuff that's coming from Bleecker. In 1971, he had to be restrained from wailing on rival hustlers when Lo-Wei paid to film the park scene in Fist of Fury. Linda was all too aware that his refusal could hamper the well-being of their two kids. In Robert Klaus's 1987 book about Enter the Dragon, his wife Anne had to say this about Linda. Her only problem, or so it seemed at the time, was her fear the children might be kidnapped for ransom. Not something not uncommon in Hong Kong. It was perhaps the only thing that distracted her from being totally absorbed by Bruce. Now, I've said before, I am a little bit skeptical on a lot of this triad shit. Because, first of all, the triads, the phrase, the Triads Did It, is kind of the God of the Gaps argument for anything related to Bruce Lee or anything in Hong Kong that people can't explain. You know, did Bruce get in the face of some triads who were trying to shake down Lo-Wei on the set of whatever? Perhaps.
It's possible. Yeah.
But also, more than likely, Lo-Wei had to pay these guys anyway. So then why would they still be salty at that point anyway, right? The idea that the triads are all, because the triads are the Chinese or the Hong Kong mafia. And for a lot of Westerners, we often conflate them with La Costa Nostra.
Right.
We often conflate this with the Italian mafia of the 70s and 80s, or the view of Mario Puzo's Godfather and those kind of stories, right? And this may come as shock to a lot of people, but the Chinese mafia is not the Italian mafia.
Okay.
Like, they're not exactly the same. Yes, in organized crime, in organized criminal enterprises and societies, you have a lot of the same tropes and you have a lot of the same things: extortion and shakedown and vice and racketeering and murder and drug running and all this stuff, right? But to always just kind of imprint our idea of, John Gotti killing the main rival to total supremacy in broad daylight on 46th Street in the 80s, they're going to want to shoot Bruce Lee because, he's the guy who wants to go against the triads or whatever. I'm still waiting for very clear evidence on that. And the fact that people just invoke the triads because the triads were involved in kind of almost every aspect of Hong Kong society.
Yeah.
And corruption was a huge part of Hong Kong society, especially before 1974.
Yes.
All right. Bruce Lee dies in 1973. In 1974, they because of the shenanigans of one of his countrymen, Peter Godber, a Brit, who was, who believe was the chief of police.
Godber screwed it all up.
Because he got caught. And then they found out that corruption in the police force was not just at a low level in the Chinese police force, or not just, as they thought previously, just among the Chinese officers, but it was also among the British officers of the Royal Hong Kong Police Force, that they realized, like, we finally need to do something about corruption. And not just corruption about police taking bribes, but there was corruption everywhere. In 1972, your grandpaps is in the hospital has a really shitty pillow. You want a better pillow. You pay the nurse. Your grandpaps has a better pillow.
Oh, wow.
Your house is on fire. The fire department comes and you're in Hong Kong in 1971. Your home is on fire. The fire department comes. They're ready to douse it and they're waiting for you to pay them so they'll douse it. All right. So corruption. So don't get me wrong. I'm not at all agnostic about the levels of corruption that were involved in Hong Kong society, especially prior to 1974. I'm not at all doubting that triads were part of how Hong Kong film industry was run up until today, okay, and through the 80s. And when you look at companies like D&B Films in the 80s, and you look at the fact that Charles Leung, the son of the founder of one of the biggest triads, was one of the biggest movie producers, I am not at all the guy who says triads were not involved in this at all. Where I tend to go, how do you know that, is when people start to get into all the Bruce Lee triad conspiratorial stuff, okay? Where there's some triads who wanted to have some kind of take on what Bruce Lee was earning, for sure. Were they in a position to actually get that money from him? I don't know, okay? Did Raymond Chow have to give a percentage of the earnings of his films to some groups for protection? Pretty sure he did.
Okay.
Did he at some point not pay them and then they want to kill Bruce Lee as a result? That is a claim that you would need to prove. And when people say, well, how are you going to prove this stuff people don't know? Okay, so it means you don't have the evidence. So if you don't have the evidence, you cannot say that's what happened. This is where people go off the fucking rails when it comes to these things. Right. Yeah, well, how are you going to have evidence that they were buyouts? Because, of course, the triads aren't going to say this. Yeah. So you're saying you don't have evidence. So you can't say because the triads would not have given Raymond Chow a receipt on the extortion money, and you can't prove it, ergo, it must have happened. Ergo, they killed Bruce Lee. No, those are jumps you are making without evidence. It's possible that that's the case. But if you don't have evidence, saying the triads did it, all right, is not your God of the Gaps argument for all things mysterious regarding Bruce Lee, Raymond Chow, Concord Films, Golden Harvest, and what was going
Brandon Lee.
Okay, Brandon Lee, all this kind of stuff, right? Because the idea that people would want to kill a cash cow is idiotic. The Chinese, they want to make a buck. The triads want to make a buck.
They do want to make a buck.
You know how you don't make a buck? By killing the biggest star in Hong Kong.
Right.
That's how you lose.
Yeah.
Raymond Chow wanted Bruce Lee killed. Awesome. What happened to Golden Harvest in the years after Bruce Lee died?
Ooh.
They struggled. Because Golden Harvest was a struggling film company, being just bogged down in litigation from his former employer and mentor, Run Shaw, trying to just keep throwing litigation at Raymond Chow so that his new film company can't get off the ground, trying to block him from using former Shaw actors in his new enterprise of Golden Harvest. And then finally, Raymond Chow finds Bruce Lee. It's this huge cash cow, saves his company, and they might as well just be printing money at that point. Yeah, sure, I'm pretty sure Raymond wants to kill Bruce. All right?
No,
but that would totally make sense, right? Or I'm sure the triads wanted to do it or whatever, right? And then what happened to Golden Harvest in the years after? They lost their cash cow. They're trying to push Jimmy Wang Yu, who, I'm sorry to Jimmy Wang Yu fans. Jimmy Wang Yu fucking sucks. Okay? He sucked before Bruce Lee.
Yes.
He sucked after Bruce Lee. Okay? You want to...
Jimmy Wang Yu and I don't care.
Jimmy Wang Yu and I don't care, right? When people try to tell me, how great Jimmy Wang Yu was, I'm like, out of here with that shit. All right? Jimmy Wang Yu is the David Carradine of Hong Kong. All right?
Oh, no.
And so, and although he was not as good of an actor as David Carradine, I mean martial arts skill-wise. Damn, a swimmer Jimmy from Taiwan and a wife beater. All right.
Oh.
And look, I can handle lots of personal vices.
Yeah.
The fact that Bruce Lee had a cocaine habit, hey, that's what it was. I'm like, you had cocaine habit. Any of that kind. The moment it's like, dude regularly beats his wife, I don't give a shit. He could give all the charity to all the kids.
Yeah.
Still a wife beater. All right. Like for me, that's like. All right. Yeah. So anyway,
bottom of the barrel.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get back to it. So Yeah, so maybe there was some static and some stress between Bruce and Triads or whatever. But then to necessarily say that this was the reason why he died, which is not necessarily implied here, but I'm just saying we have to be mindful about these kind of things, right? Because the Triads are not the end-all, be-all answer to things you don't know. So now, that was Saturday, May 5th. Now, we come to a very dark day in Bruce Lee's life. Thursday, May 10th. The famous collapse.
I know it. Yeah.
Now, for people who
May 10th.
who may not know, I actually did an entire episode on the May 10th collapse.
That is right.
So I don't want to
It's
just
like
kind
year
of
two.
rehash everything here.
Okay.
But I had gotten a really great book, which went into a lot of aspects about Bruce Lee's death in more detail than any other book. I believe the book is literally called The Death of Bruce Lee.
Oh.
It was the Marcus Ocaña book.
Mm-hmm.
Where it had all the now it was a lot of stuff that I had seen before, but I had gotten it from different sources, and it's just like this blog post. It just took all the different sources and put it all in one place. So you had all the inquest interviews after Bruce Lee's death. It had all the newspaper shit, and then Marcus Ocaña even updated it after the drug letters came out, and there was some really interesting stuff in there after the drug letters came out, because then. You know, it was for most of the Bruce Lee biographers, whether it was John Little or Steve Carriage or Matt Pauly, there were things about this time period in particular, 1973, Jan to July, that without the knowledge of the extensive cocaine use, there were just things that were like, what was going on that seemed to be the catalyst for Bruce Lee's constant agitation. You know, and you can always say, oh, it was the stresses of being a big star, which for sure were there.
I'm sure they are.
But there was always this thing where people were like, kind of like, there's something going on that we don't know. And in my private conversations with some of the famous Bruce Lee biographers, whether it's Carriage or Pauly or Little, I can't say who said what, because those are private conversations.
Yeah.
But the feeling was, after I had discussed this thing with them, once the Bob Baker letters came out, it was like, oh, now everything makes sense. It was the one thing that was kind of missing from like
the missing link.
What is the issue that's going on kind of between the scenes? And one of them was his May 10th collapse.
Yeah.
And his May 10th collapse was horrific. And as a matter of fact, I think that's the title of the episode. Was the May 10th collapse was horrific.
What was that? Season 1, season 2?
I don't remember. No, it certainly wasn't season 1 because we were already upstairs. It was season 2, season 3. Might have been last season.
All right.
And it's a deep dive where I went into like the stuff that was in that book, and it was more from the doctor's perspective because they had interviewed the doctor when they brought Bruce into the Baptist University, and he was convulsing and having the seizures, and he was trying to you know, talk about how strong Bruce Lee was when he's having a seizure and he's trying to like get him strapped down.
Oh, man.
And how they had to get a bunch of people to hold Bruce down. Because you imagine when someone is having a seizure, how strong they are because they're just resisting. But now it's also Bruce Lee.
Right.
So it's like, you know, you have incredible strength as far as that goes, and how they figured out that it was a seizure, that it was most likely a drug overdose. And that they had moved Bruce over to another hospital because Baptist University
he broke the straps.
No, because Baptist University was on a at that time a certain number of Hong Kong hospitals were required by law to report any incident that would be a drug overdose. They had to report it to the government. So if you came in with the effects, you came in with the symptoms of having had a drug overdose, and then they run tests and they find out that you in fact had a drug overdose, they would have to report that to the Hong Kong government, which could mean that there were then legal ramifications. Yeah. But there were, and these were things that were in the Marcus Ocaña book, but they were certain hospitals in Hong Kong that were not required to report these things. Oh. The hospital that Bruce Lee died in, by the way, Queen's Elizabeth, the one that I showed you when we went to Hong Kong, was not required to provide that stuff.
Now, how do they get that?
How do they get
out of that?
It may be because so I don't know which hospitals had to and which weren't. Yeah. It could be because maybe this
The
public
jurisdiction.
maybe the public hospitals didn't have to, but maybe some of the private hospitals did, or maybe it was the other way around. I don't know, because I don't know if Baptist. I don't know where they got their funding from. If it was straight from the university, Baptist University,
Okay.
or if they, so I don't know. So that would be talking out of my ass to say that, right? I just know that some hospitals did, some hospitals didn't.
Wow.
And after Bruce's May 10th collapse, after they had kind of gotten him stable, before they could run certain tests on Bruce, they moved him to another hospital. Not to Queen's Elizabeth. I forget the name off the top of my head. It's at St. Teresa's, I think. And St. Teresa's did not require to report anything drug related.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that I'm not a conspiracy guy, but that no, I mean that with all, because it's therefore I'm saying like a conspiracy just means there's more than one person involved to perform or
Conspiring,
commit conspire to whatever you're doing, right? It doesn't mean that it's like, it's this web of 80 things that came together just so that your narrative can fit, right? But I think that a strong case could be made that Bruce Lee was moved to St. Teresa's after the May 10th thing because they perhaps did not want the reason for his convulses, his seizures to be made public, to have some legal ramifications and so on and so forth.
Don't report it.
What we know, and I'll read it here. We know that Bruce started to feel ill during a dubbing session for Enter the Dragon. So it's May 10th. They had, from what I understood, finished shooting Enter the Dragon sometime in April. And you have to do what's called ADR, which is it's basically audio recordings for films that you have to do after the fact. Okay. And you can tell ADR a lot on films when they have to put in a throwaway line that maybe wasn't in the original script. And then they'll use a scene of the actor when his head is turned to the camera. And then they'll add it in audio. And in the older films, it was a lot more obvious because that audio sounded like it didn't quite match like what was going on before. Or maybe you could see that the guy wasn't moving. But that was a common thing. And so for certain scenes, either they shot them without sound or they needed to be redubbed. Bruce was doing the dubbing. And according to Bay Logan, whom we had done a couple episodes with, there was a point where they were actually going to do a Cantonese version of Enter the Dragon. And they were even going to, instead of just dub it into Cantonese, they were actually recording a Cantonese version. So they would do the scene in English, and then they would shoot the scene again in Cantonese. Whoa. But they had only done this, at least according to Bay, for the first few scenes. Because when Bay worked for Media Asia, which is essentially the company that bought the catalog from Golden Harvest, he found, because I asked him, I go, have you ever seen any extra footage of Bruce Lee's that hasn't really been made public? And he told me that he had found footage of Enter the Dragon scenes that were in Cantonese, but apparently they had scrapped it, which is weird because that would be very expensive to kind of shoot two versions of every scene. Wow. It would be much more cost effective to just do a Canto dub of it. Okay. So I've never heard the Canto dub of Enter the Dragon, by the way. I'm sure there is one, but I've never heard.
They probably figured that along the line.
But also like the Cantonese speaking audience was such a small part of the market share. Yeah. That it would actually have just made more sense to just put English and Chinese subtitles burnt into the screen for the Hong Kong audience rather than to fully redub it, especially for an international film where they're not making tons of money off of the Hong Kong version. So Bruce has collapsed while he was at the Golden Harvest dubbing for Enter the Dragon, and then he felt kind of ill. So the basic story, and I'll read it here in a moment. I don't want to recap too much because I did a whole episode on it. Basically, he felt ill. He was kind of sweating. This is where Matt Pauly's kind of heat stroke hypothesis started to pop in because in the small studio, which is a very small room, they have to turn the ACs off because especially you mentioned the ACs at that time were really noisy. Ooh. All right. So if you're going to record clean audio, you can't have some noisy ass AC in the background. So think about it. We're in May 10th, which is hot as balls in Hong Kong. Not quite as hot as in August or July when we normally go. But May 10th in Hong Kong could get pretty swamp ass would be a normal thing on May 10th in Hong Kong. And so he's in there, no AC, recording in a small room, full with like that foam insulation, So it's just, you remember how hot our old podcast studio was when we had all the foam?
We would have to turn the AC off.
You would have to turn the AC on, run it, and then turn it off, record like 20 minutes of our episode, pause, run it again, right? Because it's so hot. So imagine Bruce is like starting to sweat and he's starting to feel kind of faint. He goes to the bathroom. He starts vomiting. He doesn't really feel great. By all accounts, he was like on the floor. An employee came in and looked at him and said, "Hey, are you doing okay?" And then he said, "Oh, I'm looking for my glasses, which I dropped here." He didn't want to admit. Then even I think according to Bruce and according to later testimony, Bruce in all his infinite wisdom, man, absolute kung fu genius and innovator in martial arts, thought that the thing to calm him down at this moment would be to eat a hash brownie. And goes back, starts vomiting, convulsing, and then goes in later in the inquest. They say, well, he wasn't feeling well. Mm-hmm. And then they admitted that he had taken like a hash brownie and then he started vomiting. But what seems painfully clear from what we now know about the cocaine use and what I think can be deduced from certain statements, which maybe Dr. Langford not want to speak to directly, it seems that Bruce was kind of wigging out on cocaine. That's why he started to feel a little sick and then had decided in all of his infinite wisdom to then eat a hash brownie after that. But then later they said it was just that. But it seems that Bruce
probably felt
Bruce was potentially already ODing on something else. Ooh. Okay. And maybe he didn't quite understand that was what was going on. And then thought he's going to take this other thing to bring him down. Because what we understand from, I'm not entirely at liberty to say, let's say have it on very good source that Bruce during this period was using cocaine during the day pretty heavily to work and to increase his productivity because he felt that he could, in the letters, that it was helping him write. It was helping basically helping him kind of, be more productive
on a higher level.
At nighttime, he was then using weed and hash and these things to kind of bring himself back down. So the idea that Bruce would take like a hash brownie or
he had cookie, it on him ready.
But the idea that he would take it, like if he felt that he was kind of wigging out or too high strung, that he would take that to bring him down. That seems to be in line with what we understand of his drug use during this period in his life. So I while we can't say for sure that that's what was happening, I find it very reasonable to believe that Bruce was already ODing at the time that he was starting to kind of vomit and start to feel kind of like he's having a headache and he's sweating profusely. He vomits. Okay. And then in his wisdom decides to take a hash cookie to kind of calm him down when he may already be ODing on something else, which is, by the way, the reason why
trippy.
Not to get kind of to go too much into the future here. But like, I mean, look, we're 40 minutes in and we're still on the first entry on this here, right? Which is why this is definitely going to be a multi-part series. No. Even if you look at the original reason Bruce Lee died was that he had a headache. He took Equagesic, which he happened to be allergic to, and then this caused him to have cerebral edema. What seems pretty clear from the symptoms and also from this passing, and look, I'm not a doctor, so I'm totally speaking out of my ass when I discuss medical things, all right? But so I mean, anyone who has actual medical training and feels that what I'm saying is not correct, I'm more than welcome to be corrected on it. This is not my field. Ask me anything about bong cell, all right?
Yeah.
But what seems to be clear is that when Bruce was having his quote-unquote headache on the day that he died, that was the cerebral edema. That was the swelling of the brain.
Right.
Okay? And so the idea that the headache caused the swelling, it seems pretty clear. Or I should say the headache is the thing that the headache is the symptom of the cerebral edema. So then to say that the aspirin he took is what killed him, when most likely what he was feeling was already that was the thing that like when you look into what they actually wrote in the autopsy, you go, Well, then wasn't the headache already the brain swelling?
Uh-huh.
It wasn't like he felt fine, took Equagesic because, I don't know, his shoulder hurt, and then got cerebral edema.
No.
His brain is starting to swell. He feels a headache coming on. He takes something that is essentially an aspirin, and then he dies from that. No, the headache is already the cerebral edema. What caused the cerebral edema? Well, it turns out 6 or so weeks earlier, all right, on May 10th, 5 weeks earlier, he had the identical thing happen where when he passed out, when he started to vomit, when he took the hash brownie, when he was convulsing, and they brought him to the hospital on time, well, guess what? His brain was starting to swell. And why was his brain swelling? Because of a drug overdose. So they gave him mannitol. His brain swelling went down. They wanted to find out, why did this happen to you, Bruce? Bruce was probably aware why it happened. Went to St. Teresa's. Then goes to the States later to get checked out. Trying to avoid any kind of direct news. Anyone finding out exactly why, when he probably most likely knew. And you basically put the same exact circumstances onto the day he died. And the only difference is they did not get Bruce to the hospital in time to quell or to calm down or ameliorate the cerebral edema.
Right.
So 2 identical things. Bruce has cerebral edema on May 10th. They get him to the hospital. They bring the brain swelling down. He can keep going on. Same thing happens July 20th. He has cerebral edema, but they wait too long. He dies. They bring him to the hospital. Oh, it's because he took Equagesic. Well, he didn't take Equagesic on May 10th.
Right.
All right. And Equagesic, when you look at his doctor's notes, was something that he had taken for a few years before. Bruce did not take Equagesic for the first time on July 20th in Betty Ting-Pei's apartment. Yeah. And oh shit, too bad I didn't know I was allergic to it. Yeah. And that's what killed me. He had been prescribed Equagesic a few years early, even for his back injury. Equagesic is nothing more than aspirin with a very mild muscle relaxant in it. So it's a very, very mild drug. So the idea that Bruce died from aspirin, when it's pretty clear that the cerebral edema is being caused by other things, it's just to give, in my opinion, the wrong thing to blame. But I'm not a medical expert, willing to be corrected.
You know Dr. Eisen.
I'm no Dr. Eisen. All right? My uncle, all right, my father's brother, he was Dr. Richter, right? But he was a doctor of automotive engineering, not a medical doctor.
Okay.
So anyway,
different.
There was one Dr. Richter in the family, but that wasn't a medical doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go to Thursday, May 10th. All right. So during a break in the dubbing session of Enter the Dragon at Golden Harvest Studios, he collapses in the men's room and pretends that he's looking for his glasses. A studio assistant helps him walk to the dubbing room, but Lee collapses, vomits spaghetti, and convulses. At 1700 hours, 5 o'clock p.m., Raymond calls Baptist Hospital with the intent of asking to talk with his own physician instead of phoning the paramedics. The doctors presume that he is poisoned because of a combination of kidney failure and brain swelling. Why they think kidney failure and brain swelling, not quite sure about that. Again, the one issue I have with some of the things in this blog is they got the facts, but then he occasionally throws in his own interpretation, which I don't know where that comes from. And it's clear that he's got some Bleecker stuff in here, and Bleecker stuff, while Bleecker had some really good stuff in his Unsettled Matters, he also has some speculation, which is like, okay, I see where you got this information, but then you threw this nugget in there. And that's the problem, is that when it comes to these takes,
all right,
the reason why people usually go, oh, Team Bleecker or Team Shannon Lee or Team Matt Pauly, is because people are very like, you either accept the entire narrative of this one person, which means the other person's narrative is entirely wrong. All right. And this kind of binary thinking is the reason why people can't agree on this stuff. It's like, no. In Tom Bleecker's book, Unsettled Matters, very clearly, he's like, he's got this right. He's got this thing. He fucking made this up. This is speculation. This is his own opinion. This is real. It's not everything Bleecker says is correct. Got this right, got this right, got this right, pulled that out of his ass because where does this come from? You know what I mean? There'll be stuff like he has a very, like, for example, he's got a very Kempo-centric view of the martial arts world because he's a Kempo guy. All right. So that like informs a lot of his narrative and a lot of where he goes, where it's like, where is this shit coming from? Right.
All right.
So, and then you can't say, oh, Matt Pauly got this, right? So therefore, the heat stroke thing must also be correct, all right? Matt Pauly's a good friend of mine. I think the heat stroke thing is bogus, all right? And I think now, since the drug letters came out, I think Matt Pauly also thinks it's bogus, all right? But that would be up to him to say. It's not up to me. So where do we get this information that they think it was because of kidney failure? Maybe brain swelling, yes, but the kidney failure, this seems like an interpolation. I don't know where this information comes from. And the drug that saved his life was mannitol because it tends to be used to flush out the lethal excess of sodium. So anyway, they get him to the hospital in time. They're able to quell the brain swelling. And so we have another account here. This is from the same day, Chow Fok Wing, who looks like he was in the video Death by Misadventure, which was a great documentary on Bruce Lee's death. And so this, I believe, Chow Fok Wing, I'm going to say he may have been either I think an assistant, like a production assistant. He was a production assistant there. So his quote was, we were helping Bruce Dub enter the Dragon. We had just broken for lunch and we heard someone shouting from the upstairs toilet. We then ran upstairs to see what was wrong. We saw a body lying outside of the toilet, and it was Bruce Lee outside the toilet door. We tried to bring him around. We carried him into the dubbing room and placed him on the sofa. I remember his mouth was chattering up and down, meaning like this. We thought he was experiencing an epileptic fit. So the sound mixer placed a metal spoon in his mouth, and the producer came and took him to the hospital. Because back then, I think they always thought if you were having a seizure, you were going to swallow your tongue. So like putting a tongue in someone's mouth when they were having a seizure was a normal thing. I don't think they do that.
Spoon.
Yeah, spoon, yeah. I don't think they do that anymore. I'm not even sure if that's recommended, but I don't know. If you're taking medical advice from the Kung Fu Genius, you're a fucking idiot.
I think it has been debunked. But
I think it has been debunked,
You're
right?
supposed to you were supposed to use a belt.
A belt.
Because if you used your finger, or anything else, you could have it bitten off. That was what they used to say.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah. So they said that it was a grand mal idiopathic, which means that it was a convulsion due to no known primary cause. This is because they weren't able to run the tests they needed to run to find out why. The normal treatment for this was to prescribe medication, which calms brain activity. Bruce was prescribed the drug Dilantin, but no traces of this were found in his body after death, which seems to indicate that he had forgotten to take it. So that quote that I just gave was from the inquest, which was after Bruce Lee's death. So even though we're talking about May 10th, we have some people discussing this thing. We have some accounts of it that were given after his death, which kind of then, put it into perspective, which during his autopsy, he didn't have the Dilantin.
Oh.
Which meant he wasn't taking the thing that maybe could have prevented what happened to him on the day that he died. And I should say here that none of Bruce's family ever suffered from epilepsy, even in mild form, and that Bruce had never suffered from it either. This is, this is from one of the doctors. I don't know which one. This is from the tragic death of Bruce Lee. I'm not sure which doctor is being quoted here, but this is obviously from the inquest.
Okay.
And the reason why that's important is because later people said, "Oh, Bruce had epilepsy," but there's no record of him ever having it. So even the doctor kind of corroborates this. Convulsive fits similar to epileptic fits can be caused by lack of sugar in the blood, lack of oxygen, uremia, pardon my pronunciation, injury to the brain from an accident, brain tumors, or meningitis, or cocaine overdose. True epilepsy shows no such antecedents. It just happens. And although it is apparently the result of something wrong with the chemistry of the brain, what this something is not known at that time. Because they weren't able to run a drug test because Bruce Lee got the F out of there before they were able to do that. Dr. Rye's
So smart.
board told me that at no time had Bruce suffered from epilepsy. Indeed, it's clear to me that he suffered a cerebral edema, but what caused it remains unknown. Again, these are the inquest accounts from 1973, where they didn't know this stuff, didn't have access to it, or didn't want to talk about it. So that's why, again, when we say, like, once we knew about the drug letters, once we knew about the cocaine, not to say that it is the, it is the smoking gun on everything, but it does give a lot
Fills
of
in the
context.
blanks.
It does fill in some blanks, I think, without taking a very large leap. While in Los Angeles, Bruce agreed that he would return to America again in August. I'll promote Enter the Dragon, and he would appear on a series of TV promotions, including a talk show run by a man called Johnny Carson. I love how, like, the Chinese doctor is like run by. Yeah, so that was another very tragic thing about Bruce's death, is that in the promotion for Enter the Dragon, which was a Warner Brothers film, they had gotten him a spot on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. So, wow, Bruce's death not only robbed us of seeing what Bruce Lee would do, it also robbed us of Bruce Lee on the Johnny Carson show, on the Tonight Show. Which is
really cool.
Really unfortunate. Yeah. Would have loved to have seen that. So, based on Bruce's collapse, he decided to go back to the States to get checked out by a real doctor, because the Chinese were, in general, even to this day, are a little skeptical of Hong Kong trained doctors, even if they are doctors of Western medicine. So even to this day, when you're in Hong Kong, if you can read Chinese, okay. So when I'm walking, like, say you walk down Nathan Road, right, and you see a sign for, like, a doctor's office, right, it'll have, like, Dr. Wong Teng Fuk, whatever the guy's name is, and it'll say Sai Yi, meaning Western medicine. And then under in Chinese, it'll normally say where they got their education. So it'll say, like, educated in美国in America, or educated in Yinghua in England. So to say, not only is this, because I see he's got a Chinese name. He's a Western medicine, but trained in U.S. or trained in England. That is, like, the big
Street
thing.
cred.
Yeah. Even though, I mean, Hong Kong has lots of very modern medical schools, and you can get your medical degree in Western medicine in Hong Kong and be just competent, a surgeon, doctor, whatever is anywhere else. But there is a little bit of a stigma that Chinese in Hong Kong, at least, don't fully trust Chinese trained Western medicine doctors. Right?
Damn.
So I used to think that was the reason why Bruce decided to go to LA after his collapse, because it's like, oh, let me go to LA and get checked out by real doctors. But it seems now in hindsight, that's not at all what was going on. I believe Bruce was very aware of what caused the May 10th incident to occur. He had kind of skated around getting any kind of drug test done at Baptist, spent a day or two at St. Teresa until he was calm and everything was good. Said, no, it'll be fine. Decides then to go to LA to get checked out by Western doctors. It's very clear when he got checked out in LA, he did not really, he didn't say, oh, by the way, I have a regular cocaine, I use cocaine regularly every day.
Okay.
He seemingly did not tell that to his Western doctors. And that's when they were like, well, sorry, Bruce, we don't know what caused this. All right. And that's when Bruce's doctor, ironically, 2 months, about 2 months. I previously said May 10th was only 6 weeks before he died. It was a little bit longer than that. But like, he got checked out a little bit later. Just like, let's say a month before Bruce Lee died.
Okay.
Or 5-6 weeks before Bruce Lee died, declared Bruce as fit as an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
Only for him to die in the
20.
prime of his life, right? Because it just seemed that Bruce was not forthcoming about his extracurricular usages.
Damn.
Right? So it was like, yeah, Doc, I don't know why, even prior to this, in November of 1972, he went to Dr. Otto Au. I have a copy of the medical notes from Dr. Otto Au when he had his sweat glands removed from his armpit. And one of the complaints that Bruce Lee had was he wasn't able to keep body weight on. He was losing a lot of body weight. And when you start to consider how much cocaine he was using at that time, right? Yeah. Not to mention, as I mentioned before, okay, our good friend John Little was like, well, why is one of the reasons why everyone thinks Bruce Lee was so jacked, and why you also have all these steroid allegations, right? If you look at Bruce Lee's body composition in the late 60s, and you compare it to him in the 70s, I myself also believe like Bruce got way, way, way more jacked. And when you actually compare his physique, there's a photo of Bruce Lee with his shirt off in 1969.
All right.
And you compare it to him with his shirt off in around Game of Death or around Way the Dragon, where I thought he looked really good. When he's not flexed, the two photos are nearly identical. So when you look at Bruce when he's not like pumped, like he hasn't done a bunch of push-ups, he's not like, because you know it is like when you do like a pump, you do a bunch of push-ups, do a bunch of pull-ups, you get that pump, right? Yeah. And then that's when when you want to show off your physique, you go and you do a bunch of push-ups and a bunch of pull-ups.
Secret.
And then you go like this, and then you walk out like you look like that all the time, right? Okay. Of course, Bruce was pumping up before all of his scenes in the films, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
But when you would look at Bruce when he had his shirt off and he was at rest and he wasn't pumped up, he wasn't flexing, there is not a huge difference between Bruce's physique in Way of the Dragon, where a lot of people think he looked the best, and Bruce's physique in 1969. The difference is somewhat in composition in his body fat, all right? Or let's say in the, as John Little said, in the interstitial water. Because you know that sometimes you retain a lot of water. Yeah. Sometimes you retain less. And I know when I say this, we see Tom Bleecker said he was on diuretics or whatever. Look, I generally am not someone who, I don't retain a shit ton of water. I just have a baseline of like, I'm never like puffy and bloated. But I wouldn't say that I am not like, I have a lot of water on my body, obviously. And one thing, and that's clear to me, and I'm not like on the skinny end of the spectrum like Bruce Lee. When I'm in Hong Kong for 3 weeks in that heat, and I know that this is not a scientific hypothesis. Well, it happened to me, and therefore it must have happened to Bruce. But I know from personal experience, when I'm in Hong Kong, I eat like a goddamn pig. You know why? Because the food in Hong Kong is so good. I give zero shits about my diet in Hong Kong. I'm there eating
I can't wait to go back.
3 sauce chung fun and eating chung fun pai quat and everything. I'm eating all the stuff, right? Yeah. Give me all the
I'm eating it all
Chinese food, right? I don't I don't watch anything about my diet in Hong Kong.
Right.
And I have never not lost weight in Hong Kong. If I had if I ate in New York what I eat in Hong Kong, I would be the bloated genius in 4 weeks.
Bloated.
All right, because here with our climate and my workout, if I ate that much, it's too many calories. Because in Hong Kong, first of all, I walk so much every day, and I walk a lot in New York. I'm walking 2-3 times that amount when I'm in Hong Kong. One, the sun and the heat, you just sweat like. Hong Kong is a 3 shower a day city in the summertime. Right. I get up in the morning, I take a shower, I go out. Midway in the day, if I'm in my hotel room to grab something, I pop a quick shower and I'm taking a shower again at night because you're just sweating. Yeah. Like you walk out, fresh shower, fresh clothes, it's stuck on you like the moment you're out, right? I lose and I get by the end. If I'm in Hong Kong for 3 weeks,
we do laundry over here too.
I start to see striations because I'm losing massive amounts of water weight. Okay. And so the idea that Bruce, with his training schedule, his filming schedule, and being in Hong Kong all the time, what I really see is, yes, Bruce was working out a little bit more during his time in Hong Kong for looking good for the screen. But there is no real size difference between Bruce Lee in the 60s
musculature
and Bruce Lee in the early 70s. As a matter of fact, and this is something that boggles a lot of people's minds, Bruce Lee, when he's jacked in when you see him in Game of Death and he's on, when you see him in Way of the Dragon, and he has that scene where he's on the balcony and and he does the lat spread. Okay, he weighs less there than he did in 1969 LA Chinatown period. Okay,
wow.
And he is just way more striated. But Bruce always had juicy lats. It's just a matter of how much fat and how much water are you carrying that you can see the striations. So the idea was, oh, dude, Bruce was way more jacked. On balance of evidence, yes, he was working out more, but he weighed a lot less. The anabolics of that time period tended to put a lot of water weight on people. So they would get what's called like balloon face when the bodybuilders would take steroids.
Oh, what?
Because they would get jacked, but they would also retain a lot of water. And the idea that Bruce was taking hardcore anabolics at that time. And look, if it turns out that Bruce Lee took anabolics, look, I'm the guy who outed he took cocaine. Yeah. So I'm not like, oh no, my hero couldn't have taken anabolics. So if it turns out Bruce was on the crunchiest pre-Arnold stack of anabolics, I'll be the first to admit it. It's just that based on my conversations, based on the photographic evidence, Bruce did not go from 125 pounds to 150 pounds with Death Star delts, where his delts look like two basketballs and everything's like this, right? He did not have that body transformation. What he had was a more definition and less water and less body fat. All right, Bruce is way more striated, way water depleted. I believe mostly because of the climate in Hong Kong. He was not bigger. And when you look at what Bruce Lee wore, clothing-wise, we went to the Bruce Lee exhibit in Hong Kong. Oh, yeah. They had mannequins with Bruce Lee's clothes.
Strange looking.
On mannequins that were the size of Bruce Lee. And it's like, when you see him with the lat spread, of course, his lat spread is so wide, but also because of the camera, he's taking up the whole camera. If you were to actually see Bruce Lee in person, homeboy had a 27-inch waist like Prince. So the thing is, what people don't realize, it's the proportions for his body weight. But if Bruce was not flexed, if he had a shirt on and he just walked down the street and he had a different face, I'll put it to you this way. If someone with Bruce Lee's exact body composition was wearing a long sleeve shirt, had a different face so you wouldn't recognize it was Bruce Lee, same composition, but was wearing long sleeves and a t-shirt and walked down the street past you, it would be unremarkable. He would have to take his shirt off so you would see the definition. He would have to do a lat spread and have to flex. And then you go, oh, dude, look at this guy. But when I saw Bruce's clothes on a mannequin that was Bruce Lee's size, if you didn't know it was Bruce Lee and it was long sleeves covering everything, it could be a Chinese accountant walking down the street for all you know, right? It is the proportions for his body weight and his size. Bruce Lee was not a mass monster at 5'7" from years of taking anabolic steroids compared to in other words, to quote John Little, and I don't think I'm talking out of school because this was a private conversation, but John Little comes from the bodybuilding industry. He was Mike Mentzer's boy. He knows a thing or two about what it looks like when people are taking shit. He told me, he said, if Bruce was taking anabolic steroids, he was taking some pretty bad shit. Okay. All right. Because it was not doing what steroids at that time would normally do to someone's body. Right. So anyway, it's so funny. In the first episode, we did like 4 months worth of shit. Today, we barely got through 5 days. Right. So anyway, also, I don't want to go over the May 10th stuff because, like I said, I did a whole episode about it. But there's so many tangential topics about this time period that it's really quite fascinating.
So what if you could transport back in time for a front row seat into the life and legacy of one of the most respected Wing Chun masters in history? Gong Sao Wong, a tribute, direct students on Sifu Wong Shun Leung, offers you just that. Through a series of exclusive conversations, 25 direct students share anecdotes, reflections, and personal stories offering in-depth understanding of the man behind the legend. Order your copy today across 12 Amazon marketplaces with free shipping. I absolutely love this book, and I think you'll find it an indispensable part of your collection. I can't recommend it enough. Get yours today. Go to Amazon, type in Gong Sao Wong, and there you go.
All right, so now when I go into the next few days, because again, like I said, this is a composite timeline I have from the Pop Cult Master blog, some of the stuff I have from like the Death by Misadventure, some various things in the Inquest, and then I also put the drug letters in there.
Yes.
And so some of this stuff skips around a little bit. There's some information there about an incident that happens with Bruce Lee and low whey, but that happens a little bit later. So let's go to Friday, May 25th. Okay. So we're 15 days after the horrific events of May 10th. So Bruce goes to LA for a checkup and is told by his physician that he has the body that is akin to an 18-year-old. All right, an 18-year-old is taking a lot of cocaine. A neurologist prescribes him Dilantin, which is used for the management of epilepsy. So again, we have this Dilantin, which stops the seizures. But again, they didn't know what the reason for the seizures were. And it's difficult to tell whether Bruce was really that unaware that it's like, or do you not understand what just gave that to you, or what?
But just, I mean, again, I'm not. This is speculation. I'm not saying that. Just like at some point, doctor has to be like, Mr. Lee, you don't do cocaine, do you?
Right. Well,
I mean, a good doctor, because the Miami crack diet is a bit obvious.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think those days.
Yep. No, it's not just that, but I actually think that Dr. Langford did in fact say something, and that's why Bruce is like, "I'll go to St. Teresa's. I'll go to LA." So I think it's like, it's like when his doctor mentioned that, I think he was kind of like, "Well, I'll go to LA and get checked out anyway."
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, that's the thing. It's just, it's one of those
right.
Weird unmentionables.
Bruce is told to take it 3 times per day. It was only on July 20th that he didn't take the drug. So again, here we have like I said, the problem with history is not in the data. If we have the data points, it's always in the interpretation of the data. Where people, you can have conflicts. So we know that on the day Bruce Lee died, July 20th, he didn't have the Dilantin in his system, which they kind of say here might have prevented the seizures, but it's not clear that Bruce had a seizure on the day that he died. He just had cerebral edema, which is what he had on the day on May 10th, where he also had seizures. But there's nothing to indicate. I mean, Betty didn't say that he had seizures on that day. He may have, and they may not have said it. But so to say that, he didn't take Dilantin on that day, therefore, maybe that was a contributing factor into his death. I don't know if that is in fact the case. But again, anyone who takes medical advice from the Kung Fu genius is a fucking idiot. All right. So during his LA trip, Bruce called one of his 2 sisters about warning her to return to Hong Kong in July so as to be his manager, since he needed help with the accounting. So it looks like he was asking Phoebe Lee, who had moved to America in 1970 with her American-born Chinese husband, who was working as an accountant for United Airlines at the time. So it looks like he wanted his sister to be his accountant. All right.
Cool.
Keep it in the family, right?
Shout out to Phoebe.
Also keep costs down, right?
Yeah.
Thursday, May 31st, Lee meets with the author of The Incomparable Fighter for the final time, Mito Uhura. Mito Uhura was the publisher for, I think, O'Hara Publications. And they published a bunch of books later, Bruce Lee's fighting method, so on and so forth. But he was basically the publisher of Black Belt Magazine.
I see.
Mito Uhura had observed that Lee was emaciated. All right. And we know this when you see the photos of Bruce kind of at the end of Game of Death or end of Enter the Dragon. The first scene where he shot with Sammo was the last scene he filmed. He was super skinny. And you just see this in the few photos we have from May and June and his final photos in July. He just looked so skinny.
Yeah. When I look at his legs in that scene, I'm just like, ooh.
Yeah.
Looks like legs look like
they're very skinny. They barely fill the Speedo that he's wearing, right? His waist was only 27 inches. Lee tried to get out of it by saying that the camera adds 10 pounds. So his 120-pound frame would be 130 pounds in front of the lens. In actual fact, he did not know why his weight loss was happening. I think we know why his weight loss was happening. His lower back pain was so immense that his constant cortisone injections causing muscle atrophy. Now, again, where did that part come from? So when I'm like looking at this as objectively as possible, okay, Mito Uhura said he was emaciated. His waist measured only 26 inches. Did Mito Uhura grab a tape measure and measure his waist? And then Bruce said that, the camera adds 10 pounds, whatever. But then there's like his lower back pain was so immense that his constant cortisone injections caused muscle atrophy. That sounds like some Bleekerisms to me. All right. That sounds like that's from Tom Bleeker. Bro, okay. We know that he had a heavy cocaine habit at this time. Yeah. Okay. And it just seems like Tom Bleeker was trying to blame these so-called cortisone injections that the doctor's notes don't seem to be indicating too much about on what was most likely actually the cocaine's fault, right? So I think Tom Bleecker is wrong twice
Blaming on a cane.
on this, right? Bruce proved to Mito that he was more powerful than ever when getting him to hold a cushion that Bruce could deliver a punch when he was 6 inches away. The cushion landed at the far corner of the room. So Bruce is obviously still strong and powerful.
Okay.
And then Thursday, June 7th, Bruce attends the last of his physicals. He meets Bob Wall for the last time because he'll be returning to Hong Kong on the next day. Like Maria Yi, Bob notices that Bruce repeats himself, like he's telling an anecdote for the first time. This is also a common thing that people were saying about Bruce in this fight, because we're June 7th. Bruce Lee dies July 20th. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I believe, also said that he had gotten a phone call from Bruce.
Repeating
and like
himself.
at like 3 a.m, and Bruce is just like repeating himself and stuff like that, right? Earlier that week, Bruce sent a letter to Run Run Shaw where he told him that he will reserve a few months, September to November, for a Shaw project. George Lee, no relation, verified this and even went as far as to making an axe for Bruce to wield in the movie. Bruce sent the letter saying he liked George's photo of it, but Bruce never got the chance to receive it because George intended to give it to him for when he moved back to America. Again, Bruce's intention to move back to the States. And again, there was all this speculation at the time of Bruce Lee's death. Bruce was going to start making films for Shaw Brothers. And, that's the reason why Raymond Chow had him killed.
Oh, yeah.
Because, look, if your number one star is so successful and he starts saying, hey, I'm going to go over to the other movie studio, and you know that every movie you make with this guy is going to make money, then you just give him more money to stay.
That's
It's
a simple
literally
solution.
a Bruce Lee movie at that point was printing goddamn money at that point, right? So this idea that Raymond Chow's
It
like,
was a
I know
play for money.
what I'll do. I'll put my fledgling studio and my reputation and my freedom at risk by murdering my goose egg. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
In his 1988 biography about him, Klaus claimed that June was when Bruce finished dubbing some dialogue in Burbank that had been poorly recorded in Hong Kong. One of the questions that had arisen is why didn't Bruce leave Hong Kong after the May mishap? Well, he did kind of after. Hong Kong kindergartens finish in June, whereas elementary's equivalent finish in July. He didn't want his 2 children to be behind their peers when resuming their education in America. So it looks like Bruce wanted to go to America pretty much right after Enter the Dragon anyway, right? In the April 1978 issue of Fighting Stars, Van Williams, star of Green Hornet, mentioned that he saw Bruce a month before he died. Van said he had a lot of problems. The Chinese mafia approached him about certain things. I don't know what the whole story was. And he has some problems with the press over there. That's for sure. Again, he said there could be some mafia stuff going on, but the idea that they were the ones who killed him, for what benefit, for what end, remains to be seen. We're about to get into a pretty controversial day in Bruce Lee's life, which was his incident with Lo Wei. I think we will reserve that for part three, perhaps the final part. And that's all I got to say about that. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to The Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications. Tell me if you like this kind of content. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.
All right, let's do it, Dre. Full energy. Let's go. We want that BDE, all right? Big dense energy.
Big dense. All right, peeps. On today's episode of The Kung Fu Genius, the genius will continue this recounting.
Now comes the multiple outtakes we get in every episode where he f***s up the very easy intro. Did I distract you with that?
Frickin'!
There you go.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of The Kung Fu Genius, the genius will continue recounting the final months. Bruce Lee's will continue recounting Bruce Lee's final months. The genius will continue recounting Bruce Lee's final months. Lots of gems, lots of doctor's appointments, lots of, hey bro, I hate broccoli.
Dude, you almost had it. Occasionally you had a little weird emphasis.
Yeah, emphasis.
Yeah.
Right?
You're like lots of doctor appointments. Crushed it.
Not bad.
Fantastic.
Blame it on the king.
Hercules.